Hey everyone, welcome to Professor Long's Lectures in Anatomy and Physiology. This video is intended for the students in my Human Anatomy and Physiology courses at Del Mar College. We're going to be going over the internal anatomy of the eye from a midsagittal section. So here you see the eyeball that's been cut in a midsagittal section. The layers of the eye that we've talked about in lecture are the fibrous tunic, the vascular tunic, and the neural tunic. The fibrous tunic consists of this white layer on the outside here, which goes all the way around, called the sclera. So this layer here would be sclera. Near the front of the eyeball, the sclera comes around and becomes clear and becomes the structure called the cornea. This is the cornea here. There's a thin layer that covers the front of the eyeball. You see this very thin layer right here on the edge. It's kind of a whiter color in addition to this light blue where the cornea is. And that thin layer is called the ocular conjunctiva. The ocular conjunctiva. It's the thin layer that covers the cornea. Now, inside or just deep to the cornea, we have a dark layer. And if you look at the models, it's sort of dark and there's some red in there. The red would represent our choroid layer. And then the dark layer is some pigmented epithelium. But really, this is mostly choroid coat here, or choroid. So sclera, choroid. Here you see a yellow, a brown, a yellow, and then this tan. All of those layers together and all of this covering on the inside represents the retina. So this is all retina here, okay? Now, within the retina, we notice that there's this white spot here called the optic disc. It's where the optic nerve attaches. And then right above that, this area where there's a slight indentation is called the fovea. The fovea. It's this little dark spot or this indentation here, okay? Now, as the choroid layer comes forward, this structure here represents the ciliary muscle. This red conical shaped area is the ciliary muscle. The ciliary muscle has these little white fibers that are extending down here called the suspensory ligaments. Now, it's kind of hard to see. I'm going to take the lens out, but this would be the lens, and there's some more suspensory ligaments down here. These white ridges represent the ciliary muscle. The ciliary muscle is not only here, but it goes all the way around the eye in this direction. And if you notice on the bottom of the eyeball, they've taken all the color out, the sclera, the choroid, the retina, so that we could study the choroid plexus or the choroid layer, the blood vessels, but we're not going to look at this part down here. But one of the things I want you to notice is that the ciliary muscle goes all the way around the eye, and as do the suspensory ligaments. This would be the lens. And all three of those structures collectively, the ciliary muscle, the suspensory ligaments, and the lens, this whole structure here would be called the ciliary body. If I take the lens out, you might be able to see, and it's a little bit hard, and I can't move the camera right now, but there are some suspensory ligaments going all the way around, but it's really these little white lines coming down here. Now, also coming off the ciliary muscle is another muscular structure. This represents part of the iris. This is part of the iris as well, and this opening or gap here would be the pupil. Now, I'm going to move the camera for a second just to show you this, so bear with me. I'm going to try to do it so you don't get too dizzy and it doesn't get too blurry. But if I tilt the model a little bit, I'm looking at the front of the eye. I can see that this structure here and all of this is iris, and this would be the pupil, the hole in the iris, okay? So I'm going to go back to the way that we had it. And I want to show you something else, okay? Now, if we look at the eyeball is divided into some spaces. We talked a little bit about this anatomy in lecture, and the spaces are called cavities and chambers. And the lens helps define where those are. All of this space posterior to the lens is called the posterior cavity. Everything in front of the lens, all of this space here would be called the anterior chamber between the cornea and the iris. This space is called the anterior chamber. Now there's a dark space here where the number 4 is, and all of this dark space, I could literally run the tip of the pointer through this space between the iris and the lens. That space is called the posterior chamber. The anterior chamber and the posterior chamber communicate through the pupil here, so together they make up the anterior cavity. Okay? So, hopefully that covers everything. One quick review. Sclera, choroid, retina. At the back of the retina, this little indentation is called the fovea. The white spot is the optic disc where the optic nerve attaches to the eyeball. Now, if you notice, the retina comes forward. I didn't show you this a second ago, but if the retina stops short right at this edge. This little edge is called the ora serrata, and then this dark layer would be pigmented epithelium. So retina up into the ora serrata, ciliary muscle, suspensory ligaments, and lens. We have the ocular conjunctiva, the little white lining, the cornea, and this ramped up area is called the corneal limbus, and then we have the iris and pupil. We have the anterior chamber, posterior chamber, and together they make up the anterior cavity. This would be your posterior cavity back here. One last thing I did not show you, and I need to zoom in a little bit or try to get this from a different angle. So if you look very carefully, oops, sorry, I almost dropped my camera. I'm going to zoom in some so that you can see this, all right? Now, this structure, we talked about in lecture how the aqueous humor is secreted at this little choroid structure, and it will circulate through here, and it has to be reabsorbed. If you look very, very carefully on the model, especially down here on this side, you'll see this little blue dot that's connected to this vein. Let me zoom in some more so we can get a real good view of it. And that little blue dot connected to that vein is called the sclerovenous sinus, or it's also called the canal of Schlemm. There's another one up here, but it's very, very faint. Right about there, you can barely see it. That's the canal of Schlemm, or the sclerovenous sinus. All right? I hope that was helpful. Hope you had as much fun as I did. See you on the flip side.